Chefs Without Restaurants, episode 57 with Line Cook Thoughts.
One of the big things I talk about is Johnson Wales was expensive, and I came out with a student loan debt of paying $404 a month for 10 years. That's tough. And even with that degree, when I got out of school, places were not looking to pay me the kind of money that I would need to actually be able to afford both rent and student loan payments, not even factoring anything else. But they were paying, in 1998, $12 an hour to be just a cook with no responsibility at his retirement community.
This is the Chefs Without Restaurants podcast with your host, Chris Spear. Each week, I'll be speaking with food entrepreneurs and people in the culinary industry. If you're interested in learning more about our organization dedicated to helping people build and grow their food businesses, look us up on the web at chefswithoutrestaurants.com and .org, and on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Chefs Without Restaurants. Now, enjoy the show. Hey everyone, this is Chris. So today I have a different type of episode. I was on the Line Cook Thoughts podcast with Ray Delucci a couple months ago. So I thought it would be worth sharing here on my platform. I talked to Ray and he sent me the audio file, so it's with his consent that I'm reposting it here. I thought it was a great episode. I talk a lot about how I got into the personal chef business. We talk about how to maybe start your business or grow your business and some of the challenges that I've had. I've shared many of these stories before on other podcasts, but it's kind of nice to have them all in the same place. If you haven't checked out Line Cook Thoughts, I think it's worth a listen. Ray has a great voice in food service. He wants to tell the stories of line cooks and people in the food industry that maybe haven't been told before, line cooks being the backbone of any restaurant. I've watched his show evolve over the past couple months, so he not only talks to line cooks, he's had a lot of notable guests. He's had chefs, he's had food writers, similarly to Chefs Without Restaurants. So if you haven't checked it out yet, please go check out Line Cook Thoughts. It's on numerous podcast platforms. You can definitely find it on iTunes. So here's the episode I did on the Line Cook Thoughts podcast, and I hope everyone has a great day.
Hey, Chef, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me.
If you just want to go ahead and introduce yourself, that'd be great.
Sure. My name's Chris Spear, and I have a personal chef business called Perfect Little Bites, and I'm also the founder of the culinary community called Chefs Without Restaurants.
Awesome. So I like to start my interviews kind of getting a backstory before we get into anything. So where are you from, and what was food like for you growing up?
I'm from Marlborough, Massachusetts, which is about 40 miles west of Boston. Food was pretty... I grew up in the 80s. Thankfully, my mom stayed home with me until I was in about sixth grade. So we had a dinner at home every night. When a lot of families had both parents working, I like to say that, I had a real dinner on the table, but it wasn't always fancy. It was casseroles. It might be a hamburger helper. I learned to grill steak at a young age. Both my mom and dad were pretty good on the grill, but nothing really fancy. My hometown didn't have an interesting dining scene. We didn't eat a lot of ethnic food. Chinese was about it. I remember the first time I ever had a taco, and I was probably like 12 years old. But I always loved food. I enjoyed being in the kitchen because my mom always was making a meal every day. I was around that and grew up with that. I had to go grocery shopping with her every Saturday and help her do that. So there was a love of food, but I'm not going to say that I was a super fancy chef at a young age.
And are there certain meals or dishes that you really enjoyed while growing up?
Yeah, for me, we had a lot of interesting casseroles. Like my favorite was called Greco, and it was kind of like an American chop suey. It was, you sauteed peppers and onions with ground beef and then mixed it with pasta, shells, cheddar cheese, tomato sauce. You use canned mushrooms and creamed corn, and it's really funny. I've tried to make fancy versions of it using mayatakis and fresh corn and like artisanal cheddar, and it just doesn't taste the same to me, which I think nostalgia is a big part of foods. The foods you love as an adult resonate with you for some reason. So yeah, I've tried to make fancy versions of that dish, but it's not the same. So now I just make it with canned mushrooms and canned corn and all that stuff.
That's good. So you're growing up, obviously food is somewhat of an important part of your life. When did you realize you wanted to be in the food industry?
I don't think there was any ever doubt that that's what I wanted to do. I mean, I remember I entered like baking contests for youth when I was in elementary school. Middle school, I was taking intro to cooking classes because they made you take something, and that's what I was most interested in. And same in high school. When I didn't go to Votech, but when I went to my traditional high school, I took 3 years of foods cooking, of foods classes. So it's all I ever wanted to do. I started working in restaurants when I was 16, and I've never spent a day of my working life not in some kind of food service.
And what was your first restaurant job?
Well,
Or I guess,
well, Burger King, if you want to call that a restaurant. But, I think there's a lot to be said for fast food. I mean, you learn customer service, you learn speed and organization. I just saw an article on Twitter that's been going around the past couple of days about, the school of PF Chang's or whatever, something. I don't know if you saw that article about people who now work in fancy restaurants and started in kind of places like the Cheesecake Factory and stuff. So yeah, that's where I started. It was really hard to get a job in a real restaurant where I was. Everyone had this notion of like secret recipes, like you'd go in to cook and they'd say, well, what's to keep you from leaving and sharing our clam chowder recipe with our competitors? It's like, I'm 16. I just want to learn to cook. And then there was this, I had a lot of people say, well, you're a teenager. I know how teenagers are. The first time a party comes on the weekend, you're going to call out. Like, I was being prejudged by people who didn't know anything about me. And I just found it was really tough to get a job in a restaurant. All the ones that I wanted to work in weren't even willing to give me a break. So fast food it was.
I mean, I started at Wendy's, so I definitely understand the fast food start. But it, like you said, it does teach you stuff like speed. I think it taught me that, like, as much as I wanted to create fancy food, especially when I was first starting the industry, people know what they want when they go out to a restaurant. So if you're going to Wendy's, for example, you know that you want a quick burger, you want something that's quick to eat. So understanding your clientele and understanding what exactly it is you're there to do is important. I think fast food is a good teacher of that, if nothing else.
Yeah, and it gives you some of that restaurant environment of it's going to be every weekend and holidays, and you're going to work nights, and you're on your feet, and it's busy as heck. So while you might not be making fancy dishes, at least it's an intro to the industry where you might say, wow, I didn't realize that I was going to be working every night or every weekend, or that I would never get a break,
Yeah. It's also funny, though, because I remember I would have, because I was like 16 at the time as well, and I would do it after school, and it'd be like a 4-hour shift, and I would think that was so long.
Yeah.
Now, you go to now, and it's like 12-hour days. But back then, I mean, it does kind of set you up for those longer shifts in a sense that you start to work at like 4 or 5-hour shifts, maybe 8-hour shifts on the weekends, and then it's good to have some sort of experience before you go into, I guess, the real restaurants.
Yeah.
At least for me, it helped a lot.
No, definitely.
So, I mean, I guess what was your career like from starting cooking to where you are now?
So interestingly enough, I say I've literally never worked in a restaurant, and people are stunned. They're like, you started in food service in 1992 and you've never worked in a restaurant? That's not like Burger King. But I went to culinary school. I went to Johnson & Wales in Providence, and I got a 4-year bachelor's in culinary. But I just, when I got out of school, I was offered a job at a retirement community in contract food service. I was hired by the location. I think Compass was running the facility, but I was an employee of them. And I liked a mix of things. I mean, one, the pay. One of the big things I talk about is Johnson Wales was expensive. And I came out with a student loan debt of paying $404 a month for 10 years. That's tough. And even with that degree, when I got out of school, places were not looking to pay me the kind of money that I would need to actually be able to afford both rent and student loan payments, not even factoring anything else. But they were paying, in 1998, $12 an hour to be just a cook with no responsibility at this retirement community. So I did that, and I did that for a couple of years. I was in Massachusetts, and I met my wife, who was also at Johnson & Wales, and we decided to move to Seattle, Washington for a couple of years. And it was the same thing. I got out there and I went and interviewed at a couple of restaurants and didn't like the vibe of the chefs that I had talked to. And then actually another graduate of Johnson & Wales was the GM of a fine dining Jewish kosher retirement community. I'd never done kosher cooking, but he had offered me a job as the executive chef, and it was my first executive chef job. And that just kind of put me on this path of doing long-term care and contract food. And after that, I moved around a little bit. We moved to the Philadelphia area. I worked for IKEA, which was really awesome. People always say, you worked for IKEA, but they're a huge global company. And the things that you're going to learn there as far as marketing, hiring, firing, writing, performance evaluations, things like that are invaluable. And I don't think that if you go work at a mom and pop restaurant, you're going to have that kind of stuff. So now as I have my own business and have to do all my marketing and things like that, it's very beneficial that I worked for a company like that. But at the time you get some grief from your friends saying, oh, well, you say you're a real chef, but you're just cooking meatballs at IKEA. And, whatever, that rolls off me.
Yeah. That's something I did want to ask you. I thought we were going to get into it later in the episode, is this idea of the chef being stuck in one restaurant. I think it's really cool that your career has spanned over working for IKEA and working for stuff different roles in the industry that aren't just restaurant settings. Did you ever have self-doubt that you were on the wrong path while you were?
No, not really. I think, I've ended up at a couple places that I didn't love, where I wasn't doing things I was passionate about, and I moved on quickly. My most recent job before starting my own business was working for Sodexo in a retirement community, but it was a high-end one. And we had 4 different dining venues on campus. And the amount of creativity and what we were doing there was better than any of the restaurants in the city that place was in. And I say that not jokingly at all. We were, in fact, open to the public, because we had 750 residents who lived there eating 3 meals a day. So you had to have crazy cycle menus with options. It wasn't like a restaurant that you could get away with doing 1 or 2 nightly specials. The menu changed daily. The specials had to change daily. But we also could take risks on food that a restaurant couldn't. So, one of my cooks said, oh, have you ever worked with snakehead? I've always wanted to use that. And I'd say, sure. And we'd order 10 pounds of snakehead, because I can sell 10 pounds of snakehead to 750 people. Now, if you're a 40-seat restaurant, that's a pretty big risk to take, that you're going to be able to sell 10 pounds of this weird fish in the next day. So we were able to do things, I feel, there that you couldn't do in a small restaurant. We were doing sous vide. We were doing smoking. I bought, a vac machine and a circulator. We had every hydrocolloid. We built a cocktail program. I was making my own vinegars there. And people are like, you're lying. You weren't doing that at a nursing home. I'm like, yeah, I was. I don't think just because you're in a place like that means you can't be doing interesting stuff. As the older population is more educated on the global food, we had people who take cruises to Thailand or wherever. Like, they're familiar with that food. You can put a banh mi on your menu in a retirement community and they'll buy it. So I really actually got to hone my skills more than anywhere. I spent 10 years at that place and said that it would be the last place I would work before I left to start my own business.
Wow. That's really interesting that you had that kind of freedom and that flexibility to kind of go into that. What made you want to do all of that, those different things? Were you just inspired by what you were seeing in the industry, or?
Yeah. So that's what I wanted to do. And you go through lulls, I think, where you do lose a little passion and creativity, but Sodexo is a great company and they have a lot of money for continuing education. And I was just looking how to burn some of that money one year. And I found Dave Arnold, who now has cooking issues, was still at the French Culinary Institute. And he and Nils Norn were doing a workshop on hydrocolloids. And while that didn't necessarily pertain to what I was going to do, my boss said, sure, go up there. So she paid for me to go to New York City and take this class. And that kind of opened my eyes to a bunch of stuff that was going on that I had a little familiarity with, but not a lot. And if you're familiar with Dave, he knows so much about food, but he's also a super connector and passionate about people and things. So that's when I first heard about Alex and Aki of Ideas in Food, who I feel are super influential to a lot of what I've done, and a lot of other chefs around the country that I had never heard of. At the time, I wasn't on social media, and Dave encouraged me to get on Twitter and start following chefs. So that was like one of those moments that I think sparked things where the world became much smaller for me, because I started to connect with these chefs all over the world that I had never heard of. And at the time, I'm going to say that was like 2008, maybe, chefs were willing to follow you back and engage in conversations. When I look at my Twitter and see the guys like, Massimo Bottura follow me and people like that, you're like, oh, wow, that's cool, because they just like never unfollowed me. I don't feel like today they would. But, people who are really cool and supportive of what I was trying to do and offered a lot of advice as I was trying to build and grow my own business on the side.
That's really cool. So tell me about growing your business. What was that? What brought you to the decision that you were going to kind of leave all of that?
I stopped kind of loving what I was doing. I think in the food world, when you work for someone, as you move up, you cook less and less. And I always wanted to cook. I love mentoring people and showing them what to do. But when you can go a month without cooking and you're just menu planning and training, that starts to get frustrating. And it seemed like my to-do list was more hiring, firing, evals, board meetings, ordering than actually going out there and being creative with food. And I wanted to find a way to kind of get back to that. But what does that mean? Taking a step down and taking a $30,000 a year pay cut to go be a line cook somewhere? Like, that wasn't realistic either. Opening a restaurant was not really what I wanted to do, and it didn't seem feasible. So I started looking at different business models, and the idea of the personal chef business at the time was geared more towards, people coming into your home and making you a week's worth of meals. And I didn't really want to do that. I just wanted to have this idea of like bringing the restaurant to you, like catering, but on a micro level, like just going to someone's house and cooking for 2 people and bringing all the china that I want to serve on and bringing all the linens that I want to use and making a really cool, customized, personalized menu. So I insist on like no set menus. You can't go to my website and see a list of things. I send you a questionnaire. I find out what you like and don't like. And then I build a proposal of things that I want to make for you. And then I still bring some bonus courses because I know the customers still tend to play it a little safe. And I want to have some flexibility to do some really cool creative stuff. So I just kind of started tinkering with that. I started by doing it on the cheap for friends to see how it would work. But I worked in catering for a number of years. So off-premise catering is, once you've done that, you can go down to cooking for 2 to 20 people really easy. So I just started kind of seeing what worked and what didn't work over a number of years.
I'm really interested in this questionnaire and kind of how you find out what a guest likes. So, like, what are some questions you would ask?
So I keep it super brief. Scale of 1 to 10, how adventurous are you? Scale of 1 to 10, how much spice do you like? Foods and cuisines you love, foods and cuisines you hate, any dietary restrictions, allergies, or preferences, and are you okay with the use of alcohol in your food? So people like, I'm a 7 on adventure. I'm a 4 on spice. I love Mexican and Thai. I hate Middle Eastern and Korean food. I have a gluten allergy and alcohol is cool. And then I take all that information. I do have like a master list that probably has close to 1,000 things broken into appetizers, soups, entrees, desserts, seasonally. So right now, if I have an event coming up in the next week, I'll open up the winter menu thing and just start going through, and I start dumping all the stuff. If you don't like Mexican food, all the Mexican comes off. And if you have a gluten allergy, everything with gluten comes off. And then I'm still left with a pretty big list. And I look at kind of what I feel like cooking. And then if I can streamline a little bit, if I know I already have a party on Saturday night and you want a party on Friday night, is there a way to at least kill 2 birds with 1 stone and maybe have you both doing the same soup so that I can buy the same ingredients or prep them together or something like that? But I just kind of want to get to know you in a quick snapshot and then try and build you a seasonal menu of foods I want to cook.
And so how do you go about marketing, promoting, finding clients? Did you find it challenging at first, or is it something you kind of were able to do pretty easily?
Yeah, it's challenging at first. So social media is huge. And like I said, the same way that chefs were really good about interacting with me on social media, I got online, Twitter like 11 years ago and just started building a presence and constantly putting out food. And, I would say that those people back then, the chefs specifically, were influencers. Today, influencer is kind of a dirty word, but what that meant back then is like, I would make a dish and take a photo and post it on my Twitter. And then Sean Brock would retweet it to like 1 million people. And then you have more followers. And because I was on the internet, on social media at a very early time, I got a lot of traction early on. The same thing with Instagram, getting on Instagram and just putting dishes on there and, people sharing that. So that's been huge. It's aggressive kind of guerrilla marketing on my end. Like I do so much on Instagram. And it's a combination of me putting up dishes and tagging them so people will find them. But it's also a little bit of e-stalking people. Like I'm trying to compete with local restaurants. So in Frederick, we have Volt, Brian Voltaggio is there. So for me, the customers who eat there are my target customer. So I'll go on the Instagram page and see people who are like checking into Volt or tagging them or whatever. And then I'll follow their personal feed and just like maybe like a picture or comment on a picture of them at that restaurant, just to kind of give myself like a little awareness. Like they don't know who I am. And it's who's this stranger who's like commenting on my picture? And then hopefully they'll go into my feed and see that I'm also a chef doing food of that caliber in Frederick. That's some of the stuff I do.
It's a pretty good idea.
Yeah.
So, what made you get into social media early on? I mean, because 2008 is pretty early to be on Twitter.
Yeah, I enjoyed it. So I always describe myself as an introvert who likes people. Like, I grew up being introverted and kind of shy, but I just think it's because there weren't people around me who had the same interests. Like, I'm not a sports guy. I wasn't like a jock. I was kind of creative, artistic. That wasn't the group I grew up with. But once I discovered the internet, I was in college and it was really early. I was in college in 95 and we got AOL and I was like hooked, like, oh, wow, I can actually find the people that I like in this place. So I don't necessarily have to go out to a party to meet these people. Like I already know we have the same interests and we can kind of talk. So I liked having that shield up for me. I needed that a little bit. Now people tell me there's no way you're introverted. Because it's hard when you have a business, you have to be a self-promoter unless you're going to hire a marketer. I'm the face of two businesses and now I have a podcast. So I have to be comfortable talking to people. But for me, it was just social media was a way to interact with people in a not awkward face-to-face way. But I was able to transition that into face-to-face meetings. Now I'm a big fan of going up to the Star Chefs convention in New York every October. And I love going up, meeting in real life the people who I've become Facebook friends with or been following each other on Instagram. So being able to convert the online connections to a real world connection.
It's interesting it must be rewarding to kind of build these relationships with people online and then get to meet them and kind of hear their story in person.
Yeah, it's so weird. I was at Star Chefs, it was probably like 6 years ago, and I was at Booker and Dax, the bar, and I took a picture of a drink and posted on Instagram, and literally in like 5 minutes, a dude taps me on the shoulder, and he's like, "Are you Perfect Little Bites?" And I'm like, "Yeah." He's like, "Oh, I follow you on Instagram. I bet you're in town for Star Chefs, aren't you?" I'm like, "Yeah." Like Manhattan, like the biggest city in North America. And you could put a drink on Instagram and in 5 minutes, someone's following you. I don't even know why he was on Instagram while he was in this bar, because he was with friends. But anyway, we struck up a good conversation. And then it turned out we were both going to the same restaurant after we had our drink. And we both had a party of friends. And when we got to the restaurant, we just asked them to pull the table together. And it was, I think Alder was at Wiley Dufresne's like restaurant after WD-50. But we just went in and said, "Hey, we both have reservations. Can we sit together?" And they were cool. And they pulled this table together. So like our two groups of 6 pulled the tables together and we had a good meal together. And, that's what I like about it is that you can make these relationships online, but continue them into the real world.
Nice. That's really cool. I mean, that's kind of what I hope to achieve with Line Cook Thoughts, to kind of build this network of people I know and hopefully in the future get to collaborate with them in person and whatnot.
Well, it's the hard thing for me at the time was I think you stifle your growth when you don't let people know who you are. So I was working for Sodexo, a big company, and I was afraid that they were going to see something that I posted or did and not be okay with it, or my employees were going to like sabotage my business. So for 7 years, I didn't use my name, or my avatar was me holding a raw pig's head in front of my face. And that was me. So that's why this guy was like, "Oh, are you Perfect Little Bites?" Because no one knew who I was. That was my name online. But my actual business, in hindsight, didn't grow as fast as it could have because I think people were kind of skeptical when a customer goes to hire you. They want to see who you are. For me, they're inviting me into their home. And to just have a guy whose avatar is like a pig over his face, I probably could have picked a better one for customers. But my whole online persona was this chef who you didn't know their name, where they lived, or anything about them. And it wasn't until I just kind of said, "You know what, screw it. I'm Chris Spear and this is my business and I live in Frederick, Maryland." And once I kind of came out that way, then I was able to rapidly increase my network of both personal and professional connections.
That's really cool. So I want to get into this idea of chefs without restaurants and what you've kind of learned from starting the podcast and obviously building this platform. Why do you think there's been an interest, I guess more recently now, I guess I'm noticing it, in this idea that you don't need to actually have a brick and mortar restaurant to be a really prolific chef?
Well, I think the restaurant industry is tough. I think we're at the point now where you're seeing people want to have a little more work-life balance. I've got a wife, I have 7-year-old twins. I don't want to not be around my kids growing up. I don't want my wife to leave me because we're never together. I know a lot of couples make it work, but I don't know a lot who think it's ideal. Like maybe your spouse puts up with it and your kids don't understand, but like, how can you feel fulfilled in your career, but kind of on your own terms? So I like the idea of building my dream restaurant that I have open whenever I want. So, if it's my wife's birthday, I block out that day and I don't take a gig. So we kind of live and die by our calendar. And I work when I want to or need to work, but there's blackout dates and times. So I just think a lot of people want a little more flexibility there. And, as bigger businesses take over, there's more restaurant groups as opposed to, I don't know that there's more, but you're seeing a lot of restaurant groups where I think the chefs are probably having less creativity and flexibility than in their own, smaller places, and just, wanting to do something different. And if you build a business that's portable, I can take my business anywhere in the country. If you build brand, Perfect Little Bites could work in any city in the country. If you have a food truck and you want to move, you can have that in any city in the world, and there's less overhead. I have like zero overhead because I do my cooking in my customers' homes. I don't have any employees except those that I hire on a as needed basis. In the first year, while it was still part-time, I bought most of my equipment in China and stuff like that. So pretty much day to day, it's just managing my food costs and then my marketing costs and anything that comes along with it. So I think there's just a lot of viable options out there of how to make really interesting, awesome food that's not confined to the walls of a restaurant. And there's lots of options in the food world that aren't even being a chef. I call it chefs without restaurants, but if you're a food photographer or people who are doing, social activism through food, I just wanted to also share the stories or let those people tell their stories of what they're doing in the food world and what the food world means to them besides line cooking. I think we've had decades of listening to chefs and line cooks talk about what they do. And now it's the turn for some other people to tell their stories.
Yeah. It's interesting because I found between episodes 50 and this was going to be 68, I believe, at the podcast for me, a lot of those guests I've had on have actually been people who aren't necessarily chefs in restaurants. We've had like bloggers on, or we've had personal chefs like yourself. We've had food writers, and I just find it interesting how diverse the industry is, and yet so many cooks feel this like trapped sense that they're in an environment where they can't get out of. I mean, I'm talking to Cooks Weekly still who feel like they're, low in inspiration, they're not sure what to do, but yet there's an industry out there full of different opportunities, jobs, places they could be at, and they don't take those opportunities and different, I guess, positions because a lot of them feel either A, they're selling out, B, they are cutting themselves short on a dream when in reality it would help them either way. So, I mean, what are your thoughts on that, on the cook who feels stuck yet feels afraid to kind of take action outside of being a line cook?
Yeah, I think you have to figure out what your motives are and what makes you happy because the selling out and the imposter syndrome thing are real. Like I became a chef and I thought that was cool, even if I wasn't working in a restaurant. But you'd meet someone at a party and someone would say, "What do you do?" And you say, "I'm a chef." They're like, "Oh, where?" And you can see the glow in their eyes. And you say, "Well, I work for Sodexo at a retirement community." And then it's just kind of like, oh. Like, and you can follow up with like, but no, like we're doing really cool stuff. But they just have this idea and it kind of is like a blow. You're like, wow, that person does not think I'm a real chef. And you have to get some thick skin about like knowing what you do and being happy with it or just not caring, like maybe you aren't a real chef and you are just opening bags of food or whatever at some place. Like you have to be comfortable with what you're doing. And I think that's the biggest thing, is you have to work on yourself in ways that don't even involve cooking to be comfortable with what it is you want to do. But yeah, there's a ton of fear. I think a lot of people benefit by keeping you scared. I've had bosses who will say, oh, the grass is always greener, meaning like when you had a job opportunity that you wanted to leave for, it was like they belittled you for wanting to leave. Like I always told my cooks, like you're ready to move on. Like I did not, even though it was going to hurt me, it didn't benefit me to keep someone when they had kind of outgrown the place. And I would actively say to them, like, I think it's time for you to move on, not because you're not doing good, but there's no room for you to grow here. And I think there's some awesome opportunities. And I've always tried to connect cooks with other chefs or places that might need someone and help them grow. But I know that doesn't seem to be the industry standard. I don't think a lot of chefs are looking to move their cooks out and get them a better job.
No, I agree with that. But that's the notion of what a chef really is. I mean, I think we're really starting to get into this conversation. We're starting a new decade, and hopefully in this new decade, we kind of rethink what a chef really is, because for me, it's someone who provides food to people, whether that be in a restaurant or in a retirement home or wherever it may be. If you're providing food to someone and you're making someone's day better through your work, I mean, that should be what a chef is. A chef doesn't necessarily have to be this figure in a Michelin star kitchen, demanding his team or her team to be the best they can be and try to win awards. Like that's not real. That's not really what everyone does in the cooking industry.
And there's so many different options. And that's why I want to be highlighting these people. Like I see you had Dave from PolyScience on your show, right? Mm-hmm. Like I know Dave, I've known him for a number of years. Like how cool does that job seem? Like you're traveling around the world, going to some of the best restaurants and teaching people how to use the equipment. Like he's a chef. It's just a very different thing. Like people don't think like, oh, I could go work for this big, culinary equipment company and train other people. There's just so many interesting things out there that I think a young line cook might not think about. Every young line cook wants to have their own restaurant someday. I hear it all the time, which is fine. But is that realistic? And do you even know what it means and takes to get to that point?
Yeah. And I mean, I tweeted the other day about the idea of being scared to even own a restaurant. And you had tweeted at me like, why do you want a restaurant? And I did have to think about it for a minute, and it really is a place to, I guess, make people feel better with food. But what I've learned, or what I'm still learning, and I guess what you're teaching me through this episode, is you don't really need a place. It's you that has to be that person that goes in and makes people feel better.
And what I love right now is the rise of the Airbnb. I hope people listen to this and take it to heart. Right now, Airbnb, there are people buying really cool properties. The amount of mansions that I've cooked in is ridiculous. So a lot of them are kind of set off in the countryside, and you get these people with a lot of money in big cities who want to get away for the weekend and rent this mansion out in some farm country so they can go do wine tasting, but then there's nowhere to eat and they need to hire a chef. So they've got this elegant setting already that is the most beautiful place you've ever seen. They just need the food. And that's where I come in. They hire me to come in. And I've worked in some kitchens in those places that are better than restaurant kitchens I've been in. So you still have that vibe of like a really cool Michelin restaurant. But I don't have to pay the rent on any of that. I just show up with my food and some pots and pans and plates, and they can still have that feeling because they're in a very elegant setting, and I can make a really cool meal. So essentially I am bringing the restaurant to them, but I don't have the ridiculous overhead of it. And I had guests last week who paid me $175 a head for dinner. Like, I think that's pretty good money.
That is, I mean, that was my next question, is kind of, how do you go about costing out, these jobs that you do? Like,
so I don't cost at all. I feel, in my opinion, if you manage your proteins and your high-end ingredients it falls in a line because I have less overhead. I'm not penny pinching. My pricing starts at $100 a head and goes up from there. I don't do anything less. And that way I have a bigger margin of error that I don't have to worry about that. And I don't have flexible pricing based on proteins. If you want a ribeye steak or if you want a tofu stir fry, it's $100. You're not paying for the food, you're paying for the service. And I still have people who will do a vegetarian vegan meal and get tofu or tempeh or whatever and pay that $100, $125 a head, and I make a little more profit there. And then when I do a ribeye dinner, I make a little less. But because I am still charging $100 up, it all comes out in the wash. So I don't bog myself down with the day-to-day of that because I have no other costs. I don't have the commercial kitchen. I don't have the labor. I don't have the utilities, any of that. So I don't have to nail it as close and know that I'm running a 20 or 22% food cost or 40% food cost.
That's interesting. So you kind of just have this flat rate that kind of, no matter what, covers you in the end.
Yeah.
Okay. And I mean, that rate probably allows you to, like you said, get those higher end ingredients sometimes that people are looking for.
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, I want to use the best quality products I can get. And I'm also, I don't mention everything, every ingredient. Like that gives me some flexibility for both cost sake and just to cross utilize. I found when I was starting out, I was trying to be fancy, and you had a salad and it was, mixed greens with manchego and serrano and Marcona almonds and cherry vinaigrette. And then you'd have a salad the next day and like you needed a cheddar cheese and a walnut. And it's like, no. So now this salad might be like seasonal greens, Spanish cheese or just cheese or nuts, and just kind of give myself a little leeway to say, oh, I have 3 events 3 days in a row and I need nuts for my salad. Which one fits all 3 meals? Or I go to the grocery store and they're out of manchego, so I can use whatever, Mahone or something like that, giving myself an out so that I don't always have to buy 800 different ingredients for different menus.
That would probably be challenging. It was probably challenging in the beginning to figure that out.
Yeah, well, when I started out, I was also doing it on the side. So I was maybe doing 1 event a month, 1 event a week, and you wanted to be super creative and fancy. And I could do that because they were my only event that week. So sure, I'm going to make whatever vinaigrette and tell them about it. But when you move up to like doing 4 events a week, I don't want to make a sherry vinaigrette, a cider vinaigrette, and a balsamic vinaigrette 3 days in a row. I want to make 1 and be able to use it for 3 events.
Yeah, that's pretty smart. So getting kind of back to the podcast and the media, so you started the podcast. What were some challenges? Because I'm personally just interested in knowing, being a chef, being a cook, what were some challenges starting a podcast geared towards the food industry?
Well, I think, I wanted to have a broad appeal, and we're still figuring that out. Our organization has been by chefs for chefs, but I also hope that like just whoever, Sally in Missouri, listens to it because she likes hearing about the food industry. I want to create an environment where people feel comfortable telling the stories that need to be told. I think there's a lot of fluff out there right now, and I'm not looking to do a 20-minute podcast that just brushes over things. So we've had guests come on the show and tell the stories of their substance abuse challenges for the first time. We've had a guest who said, I've never said this before. And I feel that that's a special thing, that when you've created an environment that someone feels comfortable enough to come on the show and share that story. We've had members talk about being fired. Like that's a very personal thing. I've been fired, and that's not something I wanted to talk about, but I ended up talking about it on the show. So I think not only talking about food, but things that transcend the food industry so that we can relate to people. So there might be someone who's a mechanic who's struggling with substance abuse or mental health. So even though this is a chef talking about it, can we also have some appeal to, people outside of the food industry? So figuring out how we're going to market the podcast. And we're still working on that.
It's definitely challenging, especially since there's so many podcasts out there to kind of get your foot in the door and kind of become something new. Because I find with like my routine, like I have certain podcasts I'll go to, and I really, at this point right now, have no interest in getting new ones right now because I already have so many I'm listening to. So it's kind of hard to kind of break into someone's routine of podcasts and have them listen to yours.
Yeah, and I think maybe finding different guests, because it seems to be like within whatever industry you see, it's like people go on the media circuit, right? So even though there might be someone who's the right guest, I want to look and see who shows they've been on. And if it's, I listen to a lot of business. So it's like you listen to Gary Vaynerchuk and he has so-and-so on. And then you listen to Tim Ferriss and he has the same person on. And then you listen to Lewis Howes and he has the same person on. And if you're the kind of person who listens to that type of podcast, you're not necessarily hearing a lot of different stuff because the same guests kind of go on the circuit and do the same podcast. And I don't want our food one to be the same way. I don't want them to come on your podcast and then go on cooking issues and then come on my show and just kind of like tell the same story. So I listen to a lot of podcasts. So what else is out there? Who are the guests on there? And what are the stories they're telling? And actively kind of seeking out different people who maybe have never done a podcast or told their story and have something really important to share.
And for me, the biggest thing I find challenging as well with cooks is being authentic or having that authenticity, which I find, you obviously have because I see the people reacting with you on Twitter and what you stand for. And it's just not seeming like you're trying to take advantage of them. Like being a true outlet for cooks is something that you don't see a lot of anymore. I feel like our industry, and this is something that Chad Minton, founder of True Cooks, talked about, is a lot of times I feel like our industry is used and taken advantage of. And so having these outlets where it really is just a place for cooks or anyone to go listen to about the food industry, it's hard to find those outlets anymore. And so,
yeah. And I think it's because it's like, by cooks for cooks. I want to be the antidote for all the frustrations I've had. Like I find a lot of jobs through Thumbtack, and I don't know if you're familiar with Thumbtack, but it's a platform where people put, that they're looking for a chef or whatever, and that'll help you get in the door. But it costs like up to $30 to get a dinner. It's a high cost of acquisition. So two people are looking for a dinner for two with a budget of $100 a head, but then it's going to cost you $30 to send them an email. And I feel like if we build a network big enough, then we can just gig share and do it all for free and just build this ecosystem where, if I'm already working on Saturday and I can't take a job, it does not hurt me to share that lead details with someone in my network for free. Sure, I could monetize it, but then I'm just the same as all the other corporations that I'm pissed off at. Mm-hmm. So how do you build an organization and keep it free, but still cover your costs for that? For me, that means that I get as many jobs out of it as I put into it. So it's worth the time for me because I've literally gotten thousands and thousands of dollars in jobs from other chefs in my network who've shared their opportunities with me. So I haven't needed to monetize it. And I think when you're not beholden to anyone for money, that you can do a lot of things. But I find myself in uncharted territory now. There's some question about how much of an advocate should I be. One of the things we're talking about is no free food. And this is going to be a bigger thing for me and my organization. There's a lot of people out there running events who are soliciting lots of free food and labor from cooks and chefs and other industry like florists and DJs and photographers in exchange for exposure. And I'm not talking about charities. I'm talking, we have an event in my town here that they sent out a call for food vendors. They're looking for free food for 800 people for their event. And and this is an event that has gone on year after year after year after year, and they don't feel like they need to pay people for the food because of who they are. And a lot of the chefs shared that call for food with me. And I thought long and hard about it because I do know the people who organize it and have a personal relationship with them. But I crafted, I think, a very nicely written email on behalf of many of the members of our organization saying, well, I know this has been the status quo for a number of years. I feel like it's time to change. What would it take for you to even consider giving a $2 per person allowance for food or something? Mm-hmm. But that's not something I was used to doing. And I'm just at the point where it's like, put up or shut up. I can't be an advocate for chefs and chefs' rights and then not use that power to hopefully change. And while those emails aren't changing anything for this event this year, it did start a chain of events where other food vendors felt comfortable writing their own letter and saying the same thing. Whereas in the past, they just ignored the call for food and didn't do it. This year, because I sent the email, they felt that they had my backing and they were comfortable enough to send the email saying, no, you know what? I don't work for free. If you truly believe in supporting local and small businesses, then we need to get paid for our goods and services. And that's one of the things that we're going to be drilling on this year and the year to come.
I mean, it's really interesting to kind of look at that, because that is something that I really have not thought about, is this idea that there are a lot of times where chefs are expected, because they do cook, to put up free sources of food, and without a lot of thought on labor, or they also have to run the restaurant while getting this product out the door. It is definitely something that needs more thought.
Yeah, I mean, if you're bringing food for 800 people, you're also bringing labor to help serve food for 800 people, plus the days of labor that went into the prepping, the moving of that. They're expecting people to pay for all their own permitting. But if you're a small business, you potentially have to close. A lot of the people getting these notices run mom and pop shops and food trucks. If you've got one food truck, you're closing your food truck that night, losing all of that revenue on a weekend night to go do this event, and then also give away food for 800 and the labor of all that. Like, I don't think that's feasible. So then you're becoming exclusionary. While you're saying this event is open to anyone to participate, you're really saying it's the big restaurant groups and the big chains that have the money to be able to do that. And we really don't support small businesses, because who can afford to lose thousands of dollars to do one event for the exposure that probably won't even translate to actual business?
Well, that's an interesting point, and I'm interested to see how it kind of progresses, because, like I said, that's not something I really thought about. And that's why I like having these conversations, because there's so many different points of the industry you're not even aware of until someone brings it up. But yeah, I mean, you're totally right on the topic of there's not a lot of thought sometimes, or empathy for the chef who is trying to support an event, and they're not really given much in terms of money or anything to compensate for it. So, what is some advice you would give to a cook, I guess, that is looking to branch out and do their own thing, being someone who's been able to find some success in building their own business and kind of building a platform for chefs? Like, I guess.
Well, I think if you want to do like the personal chef thing, it's really easy to start on the side. Just first of all, start with friends and family, and that do it for free or do it for cost. But just the logistics of, say to your friends, can I come cook for you and your spouse, sometime? And then work through that and just see what goes into, lugging plates and all that stuff there, and food there, and cooking in front of them and talking to them while you're cooking and all that stuff, and see if it's something you even like and if it's doable. And then maybe do a couple bigger ones for 4 or 6 people, and think about getting on social media early. Like, so much of it's free. It's free to build a Facebook page. It's free to have an Instagram, start building that following. I'm not saying that you're going to go viral, but I think as the market changes, right now the economy is good, and I think people have the expendable income to do this kind of thing. I think when the market comes down a little bit, and it will, the ones left standing are going to be the ones who look professional and have something truly interesting to offer. Right now, there's a lot of side hustlers doing it, making some good money. But you look at, they don't have an actual website. They don't have a lot of contact info or pricing structure on their Facebook page or something. And I think that's the kind of stuff, like, make yourself look like a real business, even if you're side hustling. Like, time is free. Like, go home after work and build a Facebook page and start uploading pictures, and build an Instagram and start, putting pictures in there, and then just figuring out, like, trial and error. Who's your target market? Like, you might think it's this demographic, but then it turns out it's not. And do that for as long as you can on the side.
That's some good advice. And through that, they'll be able to kind of branch out and eventually, hopefully, have their own business, which would be kind of cool.
Yeah, it all depends on what you want to do, and everyone's got their different pricing structures and what they want to get out of it, but it's definitely doable. And the Chefs Without Restaurants organization is here to help with that. We have a Facebook group that has hundreds of members, and it's a place where people will just come on and say, I want to build a website. What's the best place to do it yourself? And like, everyone's going to give their opinion. I love WordPress and I've been using WordPress for 10 years, but someone else might feel that Wix is better. So once again, crowdsourcing that information, we want to be like a one-stop shop for advice to help people get their business going. And once again, for free. Like, it doesn't cost anything to be a member of this. Like, we're all people who are into no drama and just helping other small businesses grow.
And so I guess, so Facebook, Instagram, the website, chefswithoutrestaurants.com.
Yeah, if you go to chefswithoutrestaurants.org, I have both a .com and .org. The nice thing about the .org is really a landing page with links to everything. So from there, you will find our Instagram pages, our Facebook public page, our Facebook group, links to where you can listen to the podcast. And I'm featuring members every week. So every week we rotate out with links to your whatever you want to be, your website, your Instagram page. It's usually people who are that week's guest on the podcast, but I am featuring Airbnbs I like to work with, local products that someone's making. So the chefswithoutrestaurants.org is a really great place to kind of find all the links to all the pages.
Okay, awesome. Great. Well, I mean, is there anything else you want to kind of discuss? I mean, we're coming to an hour mark of the episode. Is there anything that you had on your mind or any topics that you felt should be talked about, or?
I don't think so. If you don't have any, for me as someone who records a couple podcasts a week, I feel like, man, I think I've said everything that I want to get out there. And I'm just interested in hearing everyone else's stories. And I spend more time now answering their questions as far as, what they're looking for in the way of help.
Well, I definitely find it fascinating, this idea of, the Chefs Without Restaurant page. What are some of the biggest lessons you've learned from interviewing other cooks? I guess would be one of my final questions.
I just think learning, you hear all these stories about people who've had these mishaps. And what I've learned is that like everyone recovers. At the time, you think being fired was the worst, or at the time, that not great interaction with a client was the worst, but that everyone recovers, and it's what you learn from that. So repeatedly hearing these stories of, yeah, I burned a bridge, I walked out on a chef, and now I can't ever use that chef as a reference. Taking those stories to heart, but seeing that people have grown from that. And then by them sharing their story, like maybe you'll avoid some of those traps, but not being afraid to take risks and make mistakes. I mean, there's people out there doing some really on the surface, crazy things in the food world. And just, they had that drive and kind of faith to do that. So yeah, don't be afraid. I mean, if you're talking to cooks who don't think they can do it, point them in the direction of people who have done it. I think getting people in the positive mindset, maybe they need to see more positive role models. And that's what we're trying to do, is share the stories of people who've made it and done it, as opposed to people who haven't.
I like to end all my interviews with the same question. So basically, the followers and listeners of the page and the podcast, I call the Line Cook Nation. While it is more than cooks, that's kind of the name I came up with over a year ago, and it's something that stuck. And so now, you being on the podcast, you are part of that. So what does it mean for you to be a part of this community of chefs and cooks who are coming together to learn, connect, and grow?
I love being around people who love cooking for people. So any community that I can be a part of, it seems like everyone I talk to, I don't think I'm one-dimensional, but I spend most of my time talking to cooks and chefs and people in the food industry. And I just want to talk to everyone and hear all their stories, because I feel like you're never too old to learn. And I love hearing what everyone's going through and what they've learned. And I just want to be around more of those people. So I want to be part of this community and talk to some of those people.
Definitely. Well, thank you so much, Chris, for coming on. I'm sure, we'll do some more collaborations in the future, but I was very happy that we were able to do this. And I really do think Chefs Without Restaurants is a really cool platform for cooks, and I hope everyone that's listening goes to check it out, because I mean, like I said, you put out some great content. Your Twitter feed is one of my favorite Twitter feeds on the platform. So like I said, thank you so much, and I really enjoy the content you're putting out. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Chefs Without Restaurants podcast. And if you're interested in being a guest on the show or sponsoring a show, please let us know. We can be reached at chefswithoutrestaurants@gmail.com. Thanks so much.